You got about 30 seconds before I throw you out myself. She didn't flinch, didn't step back, didn't apologize. Savannah Carter stood in the middle of that garage, 18 years old, 5'4", with a beat-up portfolio tucked under one arm, and 14 months of surviving alone written all over her face, and she looked that man dead in the eye like she'd been waiting her whole life for this exact moment. If you've ever been told you don't belong somewhere and showed up anyway, this story is for you. Hit subscribe, drop the name of your city in the comments below, and let's see just how far this story travels. Now let's go. The thing about desperation is that it doesn't always look the way people expect it to. It doesn't always look like tears or trembling hands, or a voice that breaks in the middle of a sentence. Sometimes desperation looks like a girl with clean sneakers and a lifted chin, walking into a place she has absolutely no business being because she has run out of every other option, and she knows it, and the only thing she has left to bet on is herself. That was Savannah Carter on a Tuesday morning in late October in a small town called Grover's Mill, North Carolina, population 1,200, where everybody knew everybody, and strangers were noticed before they even opened their mouths. She had been in town for 4 days. She'd slept 2 of those nights in her car, a 2003 Honda Civic with a cracked rear window she'd patched with packing tape, parked behind a diner on Route 11, where the overnight manager let her use the bathroom in exchange for sketching a mural design on a paper napkin that he taped to the wall above the register. She'd eaten vending machine crackers in a gas station sandwich, in one actual meal that a waitress named Donna had slid in front of her without being asked, and said, "Honey, you look like you haven't sat down in a week." She hadn't. Not really. She had $47 in cash, a phone with a cracked screen running on its last few percent of battery, and a portfolio that held the only thing she'd ever been certain about in her entire life, the fact that she could draw. The garage was called Kingman's. Everybody in town knew Kingman's. The diner cook had mentioned it in passing when she'd overheard him telling someone that the boys from the club did their mechanical work there. The overnight manager had lowered his voice when he said the name, the way people lower their voices when they're talking about something they respect and maybe fear just a little. The woman at the gas station had flat out told her, "You don't just walk into Kingman's, sweetheart, you get invited." Savannah had nodded politely at all of them, and then she had walked into Kingman's. The garage was large, loud, and full of men who had clearly never once in their lives had someone walk up to their front bay, unannounced on a Tuesday morning, and ask if they needed an artist. There were motorcycles everywhere, on lifts, on stands in various states of assembly and disassembly, gleaming chrome and matte black in painted tanks that caught the fluorescent light from above. There was the smell of oil and metal and coffee and something else underneath it all. Something that Savannah recognized as belonging, the particular scent of a place where people showed up every day because they wanted to, not because they had to. She counted 9 men before anyone noticed her. The one who turned first was big, broad shoulders, gray-streaked beard, a leather vest that had seen 1,000 more miles than most people travel in a lifetime. He had a wrench in his hand and an expression that moved from blank to confused to something considerably less welcoming in about 3 seconds flat. "Help you with something," he said. It was not a friendly question. "I'm looking for whoever's in charge of the custom work," Savannah said. Her voice came out steady. She was proud of that. "The paint jobs." The man blinked. Around him, 2 other guys had stopped what they were doing and turned to look. One of them was young, maybe mid-20s, with arms covered in tattoos and grease on his forehead. The other was older, sitting on a stool near the back with a cup of coffee and the slow, evaluating gaze of someone who had learned a long time ago to watch before he moved. "What about the paint jobs?" the big man said. "I want to know if you're hiring." The silence lasted about 2 seconds. Then the young one with the tattoos laughed, a quick, sharp sound like a bark. One of the other men came around from behind a bike and crossed his arms. The big man didn't laugh, which Savannah would later understand was either the most threatening thing or the most respectful thing, depending on what came next. "You want to know," the big man said slowly, like he was making sure he heard her correctly, "if we're hiring?" "Yes." "For what exactly?" "Custom paint, murals, detail work, whatever you need." She shifted the portfolio under her arm. "I can show you what I do." "Who sent you?" "Nobody sent me." "You just walked in here?" "Yes." "Off the street?" "Off Route 11, technically." She paused. I've been sleeping in my car behind the Route 11 diner. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. That landed differently than she expected. Nobody laughed again. The young one's expression shifted not to pity, which she couldn't have stood, but to something more careful. The older man on the stool set down his coffee. The big man studied her for a long moment. How old are you? 18. You got ID. She had her license out of her jacket pocket before he finished asking. She held it out. He took it, looked at it, handed it back without comment. His name, she would learn later, was Dex. Dexter Malloy, road captain, 17 years with the chapter, a man who could read people with the same precision that other men read maps. You think, Dex said, and now there was something in his voice, not quite amusement, but something adjacent to it, that you can walk in here and tell us you can do better work than our guys. I think I can show you, Savannah said. That's different. Is it? Showing and telling are different things. I'm not telling you anything. I'm asking for the chance to show you. Dex looked at the man to his left. Something passed between them. One of those wordless conversations that people have when they've known each other long enough to speak without speaking. All right, Dex said. Show us. She opened the portfolio on the hood of the nearest motorcycle, a detail that made several men in the room tense slightly, because you didn't just put things on someone's bike without asking. But Savannah didn't know that yet, and her hands were already spreading the first page flat before anyone said a word. The first piece was a full-color mural on black, a wolf emerging from shadow done in such precise detail that the individual hairs of its coat seemed to move in the fluorescent light. The second was a tank design, a phoenix in flame, rendered in shades of orange and gold and crimson that shouldn't have worked together but did perfectly in the way that only happens when someone understands color, the way musicians understand sound. The third piece stopped the room. It was a portrait, a man in three-quarter profile wearing a leather vest, sitting on a motorcycle against a background of open road in early morning sky. It was the kind of painting that made you feel like you could hear the engine and smell the wind, and it was done entirely in graphite pencil on paper, with a technique so precise and so deeply felt that it transcended medium entirely. It was a work of art by any standard. Who is that? Dex asked. His voice had changed. My brother, Savannah said. He taught me everything I know about painting. What's his name? She said it quietly like she always did, like she was afraid to say it too loud in case the world heard it and took something else away from her. Ethan Carter. The room didn't just go quiet, it stopped. The wrench in Dex's hand lowered to his side. The young one with the tattoos, she would learn his name, was Rico, straightened up from the bike he'd been leaning against. The older man on the stool, whose name was Garrett, set his coffee cup down with a softness that seemed deliberate, like he needed something to do with his hands. Dex looked at her. And in his eyes, for just a fraction of a second, Savannah saw something she hadn't seen in 14 months of running. She saw recognition. Say that name again, Dex said. Ethan Carter. She held his gaze. You knew him. It wasn't a question. Dex didn't answer right away. He looked at Garrett. He looked at Rico. He looked around the room at the other men who were all, every one of them, utterly still. Where did you come from? Dex said. Not aggressive. Something closer to careful, the voice of a man walking unfamiliar ground. Greensboro originally. I've been moving around for the last 14 months. She kept her voice even. I've been looking for anyone who knew him. Anyone who could tell me what happened. What do you know? Dex asked. About what happened? I know he disappeared. I know nobody reported him missing, not officially. I know that my Aunt Victoria Langford told me he chose to leave and didn't want to be found. She paused, and I know she was lying. The silence stretched. Then Garrett stood up from the stool. He was the oldest man in the room. She'd put him at 60 or so, maybe older, with white hair, and the kind of face that had been weathered not by hardship alone, but by time spent paying attention. He walked toward her with the slow, deliberate pace of someone who has learned that the most important moments in life deserve to be approached carefully. He looked at the portrait. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at Savannah. You've got his eyes, Garrett said. I couldn't see it at first, but you've got his eyes. Something broke open in Savannah's chest. Not dramatically, she didn't cry, didn't speak, but something that had been held very tightly for 14 months released just slightly, the way a fist unclenches after the danger has passed. When did you last see him? She asked. 18 months ago, Garrett said. give or take. What happened? Garrett glanced at Dex. The look was complicated, the kind of complicated that contained decisions and hesitations in a history she wasn't part of yet. That, Garrett said, is a longer conversation, one that deserves more than a garage floor. He looked at Dex. She eats with us tonight. Dex was quiet for a moment. Then, yeah. And then almost to himself, yeah, she does. Sure. But that wasn't the moment that changed the morning. That came about 20 minutes later, after Garrett had gone to make a phone call, and Dex had walked away to deal with something at the back of the garage, and Savannah was left standing near her portfolio with Rico, who had said approximately 12 words since she walked in, but had been watching her with the focused attention of someone trying to work something out. "You really sleep in your car?" he asked. "Yes." "For how long?" "2 nights here. Before that, a few weeks on and off. There were places I could stay, not always." She started carefully folding her work back into the portfolio. "I'm not looking for sympathy. I'm looking for work." "What did you do before?" "I was in school, then I wasn't. Then I was on my own." "How?" "My parents died when I was 15. My aunt took legal guardianship." She said it simply, without performance. "I left when I was 17. Better to be on my own than in a house where being a Carter was treated like a liability." Rico was quiet. "Then Ethan left that same house." She looked at him. "You knew him," she said. "Not as long as Dex or Garrett, but yeah." He picked up a rag from the workbench and turned it over in his hands. "He talked about you, more than he probably realized. He'd show us your drawings, sometimes little sketches you sent him. He kept them in his vest pocket." Savannah's hand stopped moving. "He kept them," she said. "Folded up. Said you mailed them to him when you were like 12, 13. Rico set the rag down. "He was proud of you, like genuinely proud. Not the way adults say they're proud of kids. The way somebody's proud of someone they actually see." She looked down at the portfolio, pressed her palm flat against the cover. It was a gesture that held 14 months of grief, 14 months of not knowing, 14 months of a story she'd been trying to finish without knowing the beginning. "Did he say anything about leaving?" she asked, "before he disappeared? Did he ever mention—" "He mentioned a lot of things," Rico said carefully. "But this is the kind of thing you should hear from Dex and Garrett. They were there for the parts I wasn't." He paused. "But I'll tell you this much. He didn't leave because he wanted to go. Whatever happened, he didn't choose it. The Ethan Carter I knew would have never left something unfinished." She nodded. She believed him. She didn't know then how much weight that single sentence would carry in the months ahead. She didn't know that it was the first thread in a rope that would eventually pull her all the way home. What she knew was this: she had walked into a garage with $47 and a portfolio and a name, and the name had done something that $47 could never have done on its own. It had opened a door. She had spent 14 months knocking on doors that led nowhere. Social services, offices, school counselors, distant relatives who had complicated relationships with the Carter name, a legal aid attorney in Raleigh who had taken her case for 6 weeks and then dropped it without explanation. She had knocked on every door she could find. She had learned which ones would open and which ones wouldn't, and she had learned to read that in the first 5 seconds before she even knocked. This door, the one at Kingman's garage, had not just opened, it had come off its hinges. And standing inside it, surrounded by men who had once known her brother, and who were now looking at her with something that might in time become the thing she needed most, she felt something she hadn't felt in 14 months. Not safety, not yet, not entirely, but the possibility of it. By noon, word had spread through the chapter in the way that word spreads in close communities, not through announcements or formal conversations, but through the particular telephone of men who work alongside each other and share information, the way they share tools, passing it hand to hand without much ceremony. By noon, 6 more people had come through the garage, not ostentatiously, not as a show of force, but the way people come when they have heard something that doesn't add up and they need to see it for themselves. They came in 2s and 3s, made conversation with Dex or Garrett or Rico, and managed to drift within eyeline of Savannah without making it obvious that she was the reason they'd stopped by. She noticed all of it, but she kept working. Because Dex had said after the initial conversation settled, "If you want to show us what you can do, show us." He'd pointed at a gas tank that had been sitting in the corner for 3 weeks, waiting for someone with the skill to touch it. It was a commission from a member named Holt, who wanted a specific design, a landscape, a tree line, an open sky, rendered in a way that looked almost like photography but felt like emotion. Savannah had studied it for about 60 seconds. Then she'd asked for reference photos, a set of fine brushes, and a palette that included colors that weren't in the standard kit they handed her. Rico had found the extra colors without comment. She had been working for 3 hours by the time Holt himself walked in. Holt was 53, with the build of a man who had done physical work his whole life, and the temperament of someone who had learned the hard way to keep his reactions inside until he knew what he was reacting to. He came in through the side door, and Dex met him near the entrance, and they spoke quietly for a moment. She saw Dex gesture toward her without looking directly at her, the way you gesture at something fragile, and then Holt crossed the garage and stopped about 6 feet away from where she was working. He didn't say anything. She didn't stop working. For about 2 minutes, the only sound in that section of the garage was the soft movement of her brush and the distant sounds of the rest of the shop. Then Holt said, "How did you know to do the light that way?" She answered without looking up, "Because that's where the emotion is. In the light, a beat. The tree line you wanted, I can make it technically correct, or I can make it feel like the last afternoon before winter. From your reference photos, it looked like you wanted the second one." Silence. "My wife took those reference photos," Holt said. His voice had shifted. It was quieter. 2 days before she passed, 2 years ago. Savannah set the brush down. She turned to look at him fully, not with the quick, polite attention of someone managing a conversation, but with the full, careful attention that her brother had taught her to give to things that mattered. "Then I'll make it exactly right," she said. Something moved through Holt's face, a door opening briefly, then closing again. He nodded once, turned and walked away before he showed any more of it. Dex was standing near the back wall watching. He had watched the entire exchange without expression. After Holt left, Dex walked over. He stood beside her and looked at the tank for a long moment. "What made you choose that approach?" he said. "He wasn't asking about technique," Savannah said. "He was asking if I understood what he was asking for." People always ask 2 questions at once, the one they say and the one they mean. Dex looked at her. "Your brother," he said, "used to say something like that." She picked up the brush again. Her hand was perfectly steady. But underneath the steadiness, something in her was shaking. By 3 in the afternoon, she had finished enough of the tank that the shape of the full design was visible, and the 3 men who wandered over to look at it independently within 5 minutes of each other did not wander away again. They stayed. By 4 o'clock, Dex told her she had a job if she wanted it. By 4:30, Garrett had called 2 people and made arrangements for her to stay somewhere that wasn't a car. By 5 o'clock, someone had plugged her phone into a charger without asking and set it on the workbench beside her without comment, and that small, quiet gesture, the easy, unconscious generosity of people who take care of their own, was the thing that finally made her throat tighten. Not the job, not the acknowledgement of her skill, not even hearing Ethan's name spoken with reverence and grief by people who had genuinely loved him. It was the phone charger. It was someone noticing she needed something and doing something about it without making a production of it, without requiring gratitude, without expecting anything in return. She kept her face turned toward the tank. She kept her brush moving. But for the first time in 14 months, she stopped fighting the feeling that this place might matter. That evening, sitting at a long table in the back of a diner 2 blocks from the garage, not the Route 11 diner, a different one that the chapter had used as a gathering point for years, she listened to men twice her age tell stories about her brother. The stories were not polished. They were not the kind of memorial stories that people tell at funerals, smoothed down and made presentable for an audience. They were rough at the edges, full of laughter and specific details, and the occasional pause where someone's voice went somewhere private and came back. Ethan Carter, according to everyone at that table, had been difficult and generous and occasionally infuriating and deeply loyal, and a better painter than he ever admitted. He had a temper that he was working on and a conscience that gave him no peace. He had ridden in 3 charity runs and organized the fundraising for 2 of them. He had driven 400 miles in the middle of the night to help a chapter member whose truck had broken down without being asked. He had kept his sister's drawings in his vest pocket. Savannah sat very still and listened to every word. She filed every detail. She asked questions that were quiet and precise, the questions of someone who has been waiting a long time and is determined not to waste the opportunity. And at the end of the evening, when the table had gotten quieter and the conversation had slowed to the unhurried pace of people who have been together long enough to be comfortable with silence, Garrett looked at her from across the table and said, "He talked about getting you out of that house, you know that." "Victoria's house," she said. "He hated that you were there. He was working on something, some kind of legal thing. He never gave us details, but he said he was working on it." Garrett turned his coffee cup in both hands, and then he was gone. "And we didn't know," he stopped. "We didn't know about you, not the way we should have. You didn't know where I was. We knew you existed. We knew you were with your aunt. We didn't know," he looked at Dex. "We didn't know she'd cut off at everything. That you didn't know where he was or what had happened." Savannah looked at the table, looked at her hands. The paint under her fingernails, Holt's colors, the colors of his wife's last afternoon. 14 months, she said. "I know. I looked everywhere I could think of. I had no money and no car. I had to buy the car with the last of the savings I had, and it barely runs, and the back window is taped with packing tape, and I just—" She stopped, steadied. "I just needed to know. That's all. I just needed someone to tell me what happened." The table was quiet. "We're going to tell you," Dex said. "All of it, everything we know." He looked at her steadily. "But not tonight. Tonight you eat and you sleep somewhere that isn't your car. The rest comes tomorrow." She wanted to argue. She had spent 14 months being impatient with small mercies and long delays. But something about the way Dex said it, not dismissive, not placating, but careful. The way someone is careful with a thing they don't want to break, told her that the rest would actually come. That it wasn't a deflection. That after 14 months of running into walls, she had finally found a door that would open all the way. She picked up her fork. She ate. And for the first time in longer than she could properly remember, the food tasted like more than survival. It tasted like the beginning of something. She slept in a real bed that night for the first time in 11 days. Garrett's sister-in-law, a woman named Paulette, who asked exactly 0 questions and made exactly 0 comments about the state of Savannah's jacket or the dark circles under her eyes, had set up the guest room with clean sheets and a towel and a glass of water on the nightstand like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. Like young women with paint-stained hands and taped-up car windows showed up at her door every Tuesday evening and needed somewhere to land. Savannah lay on top of the covers for a long time before she let herself slide under them. Old habit, when you sleep in your car, you don't fully undress. You don't fully commit to unconsciousness. You stay just close enough to the surface that you can move fast if you need to. It took her almost an hour to talk herself out of it. She woke up at 6:15, showered, pulled on the cleanest clothes she had, and was back at the garage by 7:40, 30 minutes before anyone else arrived. She used the time to study the work already hanging on the walls. Photographs of completed tank jobs, framed prints of designs, a few pieces of original artwork that other artists had done for the chapter over the years. She moved through them slowly, the way she always moved through other people's work, looking for the decisions. Not just what they painted, but why. Where they chose to put the weight, where they let it breathe. She was standing in front of a piece she particularly respected, a black and gray eagle, done in a style that was technically precise but emotionally flat, good but not great, when Dex walked in and stopped just inside the door. "You been here long?" he asked. 30 minutes. He didn't comment on that. He walked to the coffee maker, started it, then turned and leaned against the counter with his arms crossed. "You ready to hear it?" he said. She turned from the wall. "Yes, all of it, not just the easy parts. Especially not the easy parts." Dex looked at her for a moment. Something in his expression shifted, not softer exactly, but more open. The look of a man deciding to trust someone. "Sit down," he said. What Dex told her over the next 45 minutes changed the shape of everything she thought she knew. Ethan had joined the chapter 6 years ago. Not fresh, he'd already had 2 years with a chapter in Charlotte that he'd left under circumstances that were complicated and that Dex described carefully, choosing each word as a disagreement about priorities. He had come to Grover's Mill with a reputation for being difficult and a portfolio of custom paintwork that made every man in the garage forget about the reputation within about 10 minutes of looking at it. He had been, Dex said, one of the most talented people any of them had ever met, not just at painting, at reading people, at understanding what something meant beyond what it appeared to mean on the surface. He saw things other people missed, Dex said. That's a gift, and it's a problem depending on what you do with it. What did he do with it? Savannah asked. He used it to help people, usually. Sometimes he used it to get himself into situations he couldn't get out of clean. She leaned forward slightly. What kind of situations? Dex was quiet for a moment. He poured 2 cups of coffee, slid one across to her without asking if she wanted it. About 2 years before he disappeared, Dex said, Ethan came to me with something. He said he had been contacted by your aunt's people. Not Victoria directly. Someone working for her, asking questions about a piece of property that had been in your parents' estate, something that hadn't been properly settled when they died. The house in Asheville, Savannah said immediately. Dex looked up. You know about it? My mother used to talk about it. It was her grandmother's. It was supposed to pass to her children, to Ethan and me. She kept her voice flat. Victoria claimed it was part of the estate she was managing. She told me it had been sold. It wasn't sold, Dex said. Ethan found that out. He hired a private attorney, paid for it himself, and they discovered that the property had been placed in a trust that Victoria was administering incorrectly, possibly illegally. The word landed between them like something dropped from a height. He never told me, Savannah said. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. He didn't want to tell you until he had something solid. He didn't want to get your hopes up and then have it fall apart. Dex wrapped both hands around his cup. That was Ethan. He wanted to protect you from the process. He only wanted you to see the result. So what happened? He got close enough that Victoria noticed, close enough that her people started paying attention. Dex's jaw tightened. And then 18 months ago, he went out on a Tuesday night and he didn't come back. Savannah sat very still. His bike was found on Route 9 about 40 miles north of here, Dex continued. No damage to the bike, no sign of an accident. His helmet was still on the seat. A pause. He was just gone. The silence was the heaviest thing in the room. You looked for him, she said. We turned over every rock we could find. We had people in 6 counties asking questions. Dex's voice was controlled, but underneath the control was something raw and still unresolved. Nothing. No trail, no contact. Nothing. And Victoria? When we reached out to your aunt, not directly through legal channels, she expressed concern, cooperated fully with the initial missing persons report, and then quietly over the next few months began moving forward with Ethan's estate as though he was confirmed dead. His eyes met hers directly. He had been missing less than 4 months when she started making those moves. Something cold moved through Savannah. She knew, she said. We believe she knew something, Dex said carefully. We can't prove what, but the timing. He stopped. The timing was not a coincidence. The morning continued the way mornings do when the world has tilted slightly on its axis. The rest of the garage arrived, work started. The sounds of tools and engines filled the space, and Savannah went back to Holt's tank because her hands needed something to do, while her mind processed what Dex had told her. She painted, she thought. She kept her face neutral and her brush moving. Rico appeared beside her around 9:30 with a breakfast sandwich wrapped in foil and set it on the workbench without a word. Thanks, she said. Dex tell you about the storage unit? He asked. She set the brush down, turned to look at him. No. Rico glanced toward the back of the garage where Dex was on the phone. Ethan had a storage unit outside of town. He'd been paying for it for years. The chapter kept the payments up after he disappeared because nobody could agree on what to do with it. He paused. Nobody's been inside it since he went missing. Why not? Because the key was mailed to an address in Greensboro 2 weeks after he disappeared. His attorney sent it. Rico met her gaze steadily. The address was yours. The breakfast sandwich sat untouched on the workbench. Victoria's address, Savannah said slowly. He sent it to Victoria's house. To your name, addressed specifically to you care of that address. She never gave it to me. We figured. She breathed in, breathed out. How do you know all this? Because Ethan's attorney, the private one, not the estate attorney, kept records. She reached out to Dex about 8 months ago. She'd been trying to find you too. Rico lowered his voice. Her name is Marion Walsh. She's in Asheville, and she's been waiting on you to turn up for a long time. Savannah looked at the tank. At the landscape she'd been building across it, the tree line in the morning light, Holt's grief made into something beautiful. He planned it, she said mostly to herself. He planned a lot of things, Rico said. Ethan always had a backup plan, and then a backup for the backup. Something moved through his expression, grief wearing the mask of pride. He used to say that the people who love you shouldn't have to scramble when everything goes wrong. That part of loving someone is doing the hard work ahead of time. She picked up the brush again. Her hand was steady, absolutely completely steady. But her jaw was tight, and her eyes were burning, and she kept them fixed on the tank, because if she looked anywhere else right now, she was going to come apart in the middle of this garage, and that was not something she was willing to do. Not yet. Not until she had all of it. Holt came in at 10:30 and stopped in front of the tank without saying anything. The tree line was finished. The sky was almost done. She had rendered the light exactly as she described the last afternoon before winter, the particular quality of late autumn sun that is warm and final, at the same time the way it falls on bare branches and says clearly and without cruelty that something is ending. Holt stood there for a long time. "That's her meadow," he said finally. His voice was rough. "Behind the house. That's exactly what it looked like." "I know," Savannah said. "I could tell from the photos." He turned to look at her. His eyes were red at the edges. He was not a man who would cry in front of people. She could see that plainly, but he was a man who had been handed something that broke his composure slightly at the seams. "How old are you?" he asked. 18. He shook his head slowly. "Ethan used to do that," he said. "Look at a reference and just know, like he could see what the person actually needed underneath what they asked for." "He taught me," she said. "He used to say that the technique is just the container. The emotion is what fills it." Holt was quiet. Then, "That sounds exactly like him." She kept her brush moving. "It does." "You're going to find out what happened to him," Holt said. It wasn't a question. "Yes. Good." He looked at the tank one more time. "You let us know what you need." He walked away. And the U.S. in that sentence, the casual absolute us, as though it had always been understood, settled into Savannah's chest like a stone being laid in the foundation of something being built. By midday, the garage dynamic had shifted in the way that garages shift when something new has been decided collectively without anyone holding a formal vote. People talked to her differently. They included her in conversations that had nothing to do with her. They stopped explaining things they'd have explained to a stranger and started assuming she understood the context. It was the closest thing to acceptance she'd felt in over a year. Which is why when the stranger walked through the door at 12:47, she noticed him immediately. He was wrong for the space in a way that had nothing to do with what he was wearing or how he held himself. He was wearing jeans and a sport coat, and he looked like someone who had practiced looking casual and hadn't quite gotten there. He scanned the room with the deliberate efficiency of someone looking for something specific. Dex noticed him 3 seconds after Savannah did. The man walked toward Dex with a business card already extended. "Looking for Dexter Malloy. I was told he manages things here." Dex took the card without looking at it. "Depends on who's asking." "My name is Franklin Greer. I'm a private investigator." He said it without hesitation, the way people say things they think will open doors. "I'm trying to locate a young woman. 18, blonde, goes by Savannah Carter. I have reason to believe she may have come through this area." Dex's expression didn't change. It didn't need to. The complete absence of any reaction was itself a reaction. "What's your interest?" Dex said. "I've been retained by her family, her Aunt Victoria Langford. The young woman left home without notice, and Mrs. Langford is concerned for her safety." Savannah was across the garage, brush in hand, head down. She did not look up. She did not stop moving, but she heard every word. "Can't help you," Dex said. "She may be in danger," Greer said. He had shifted his weight slightly, the posture of someone applying low-level pressure. "She's young. She's been on her own for over a year. Mrs. Langford just wants to ensure she's—" "I said I can't help you," Dex repeated. His voice hadn't risen. It didn't need to. There was a quality to it, the flat, complete firmness of a man who does not negotiate the second time. Greer looked around the garage. His gaze traveled from face to face, the way someone looks when they're trying to find the weak point in a room. His gaze landed on Savannah. She felt it before she saw it, the particular sensation of being identified by someone who's been looking for you. She kept her head down, kept her brush moving, painted the corner of a cloud with absolute furious precision. Miss Greer said. He had started walking toward her. Rico stepped into his path. Not dramatically, not aggressively. He simply moved to stand between Greer and the workbench, the way you'd stand between a car and something you didn't want it to hit. Shop's closed for walk-ins right now, Rico said pleasantly. Appointment only. I'm not here for service. I know why you're here. Rico's voice was just as pleasant as before. And I'm telling you the shop is closed. Greer stopped. He looked at Rico. He looked past Rico towards Savannah. He looked back at Dex. He made a calculation. Tell her, Greer said, raising his voice just enough to carry, that her aunt is worried, and that this doesn't have to be difficult. The last word had barely left his mouth before Dex was walking, not fast, not dramatic, just moving with the absolute certainty of a man who has decided something. Time for you to go, Dex said. Greer went. The silence after the door closed was thick and specific. Savannah set the brush down, turned around. Every man in the garage was looking at her not with accusation, but with the same focused, waiting attention she'd seen on Dex's face that first morning. The look of people who have just seen one thing and need to understand what it means. She hired him to find me, Savannah said. How long has she known where you were? Dex asked. She hasn't. I've been careful about that. Savannah's mind was moving quickly, sorting through timelines. But if she hired someone, she must have gotten close recently. I used my debit card in a town about 40 miles from here 10 days ago. That might have been it. She'd been doing this the whole time, sending people after you. I don't know. This is the first time one of them showed up in front of me. She kept her voice level. But Victoria doesn't lose things quietly. That's not how she operates. Garrett had appeared from somewhere in the back. He was leaning against a workbench with his arms crossed, watching her with that particular steadiness of his. What does she want? He asked. Specifically beyond finding you. Savannah looked at him. Ethan's estate. She's been managing it as the only known heir since he disappeared. If I show up legally, if I contest her administration, she loses control of everything he had, including the property, including whatever money she's been drawing from it. How much are we talking? Rico asked. I don't know exactly, but Ethan wasn't broke. She looked at her hands. He was careful. He saved. He made money from his work. And there's the Asheville property, which she's been sitting on for 8 years. So she's not just worried about you, Dex said slowly. She's protecting her position. She's protecting everything she took, Savannah said. And she knows that if I find Marion Walsh, and if Marion Walsh has what Ethan left behind, she stopped, looked up at Dex directly. She's going to move. Whatever she's planning, she's going to move fast now that she knows I'm not just wandering. Dex looked at Garrett. Garrett uncrossed his arms. Then we move faster. Marion Walsh answered on the second ring. They made the call from the back room, Savannah, Dex, and Garrett with the door closed and the sounds of the garage muffled behind them. Savannah held the phone. Her hands were steady. She had made herself steady. Ms. Walsh, she said when the attorney picked up, my name is Savannah Carter. I think you've been waiting for me. The pause on the other end lasted exactly 3 seconds. Savannah. Marion Walsh's voice was professional and controlled, and underneath both of those things unmistakably relieved. I have been waiting for you. Where are you, Bert? In Grover's Mill. I found the chapter. Another pause. Ethan said you would. If anyone could find them, he said it would be you. He used to say you had his stubbornness and your mother's instincts, and that the combination of those two things would carry you through anything. Savannah stared at the wall. What did he leave? She asked. Her voice came out smaller than she intended, more honest. Everything, Marion said simply. He left you everything, and he spent 2 years making sure it would hold up in court. Victoria has sent a private investigator. I think she's moving. I know. My office received a legal filing this morning from her attorney. She's petitioning for an emergency hearing. She's claiming you're a vulnerable boy adult who has been in contact with a criminal organization, and she's seeking to reestablish guardianship and consolidate the estate. A pause. She's trying to close the door before you walk through it. The room was very quiet. How long do we have? Dex asked. He had leaned close enough to hear both sides of the call. The hearing has been scheduled for 3 weeks from Thursday, Marion said. which means we have 3 weeks to build a case that proves she's acting in bad faith, that Ethan's documents are legally sound, and that Savannah is capable and independent. Another pause. And we need to get into that storage unit before she finds a way to put a legal hold on its contents. We can be there tomorrow, Savannah said. I was hoping you'd say that. For the first time, Marion Walsh's voice shifted slightly, became something warmer and more human than attorney at law. He talked about you a great deal, Savannah. Everything he built for you. I want you to know that before you see it. I want you to be ready. She was not ready. She was 18 years old and she had slept in her car 11 days ago, and she had $47 to her name and a cracked phone screen and a brother she hadn't seen in 18 months. She was not ready. I'll be ready, she said. She hung up, set the phone on the table, looked at Dex. Tomorrow, she said. Dex looked at her with the expression of a man who has watched a lot of people make decisions and who knows when someone has made a real one, what it looks like. Tomorrow, he said. She went back to the garage. She picked up her brush. She finished Holt's tank in the last 2 hours of daylight, putting every bit of her focus and her grief and her strange fragile hope into the light on those winter trees, into the sky his wife had photographed on her last good afternoon. When she stepped back and looked at it, she knew it was the best thing she had ever painted. Holt stood beside her in silence for a long time. Then he put his hand on her shoulder just briefly, the way men do when they mean something they don't have words for. And he said, she would have loved it. And Savannah nodded and didn't let herself look away, because some things deserve to be witnessed fully, even when it hurts, maybe especially then. Tomorrow she would go to Asheville. Tomorrow she would open a door her brother had left unlocked for her 2 years ago, when he had believed with everything he had that she would eventually find it. Tonight she let herself sit with the weight of being loved by someone who had prepared for her survival even while planning for his own. It was the heaviest thing she had ever carried. And somehow for the first time in 14 months, it didn't feel like it was breaking her. It felt like it was holding her up. They left before sunrise. Dex drove. Savannah sat in the passenger seat with her hands in her lap and her eyes forward and didn't say much for the first hour, which Dex respected without comment. Garrett followed in his own truck. Rico had wanted to come, and Dex had told him to stay and watch the garage, which was the kind of instruction that meant something else entirely, and Rico understood it without being told twice. The drive to Asheville was 2 hours and 40 minutes. Savannah spent most of it thinking about the storage unit, thinking about what it meant that Ethan had kept it, that he had paid for it for years, that he had arranged for the key to be mailed to her the moment something happened to him, not to Dex, not to Garrett, not to his attorney, to her. Specifically, deliberately her. He had known something was coming. That was the thought she kept circling back to, the one she couldn't leave alone. He had known, maybe not exactly what, maybe not exactly when, but he had known enough to prepare, enough to build a structure around her future and seal it with a key and point it in her direction like a compass set to magnetic north. She stared out the window and tried to decide if that made her feel safer or more afraid. She decided it made her feel both simultaneously and that maybe that was the right answer. He ever talked to you about leaving, she asked, about an hour in, when the silence had compacted into something that felt less like peace and more like pressure. Dex didn't answer right away. He drove the way he did everything with the patient, deliberate attention of someone who knows that the wrong move at the wrong moment costs more than the right move is worth. Once, he said, about 3 months before he disappeared, he came to me and said he thought things were going to get complicated, and he wanted me to know if something happened that he hadn't done anything that needed to be cleaned up. That everything he'd been working on was clean. A pause. I told him nothing was going to happen. He told me I was probably right. But he didn't believe it. No, he didn't. She turned to look at Dex's profile. Did you know about me then? I knew he had a sister. I knew she was living with a relative after their parents died. I knew he sent money when he could and that he wrote letters. He glanced at her briefly. I knew he was trying to get her out. I didn't know the specifics of what that meant legally. He kept that separate. Why? Because Ethan was careful about what he involved people in. He was generous to the bone, but he didn't use people. He wouldn't have put the chapter in the middle of a legal battle they didn't know the full shape of. A pause. That was a flaw, honestly. He tried to carry things that could have been shared. She looked back at the road. That sounds familiar. Dex made a sound that was almost a laugh. Almost. Yeah, it runs in the family, apparently. No, Marion Walsh met them in the parking lot of her law office in Asheville, a woman in her mid-50s with gray-streaked hair pulled back, and the kind of posture that came from 30 years of standing in courtrooms and not flinching. She shook Savannah's hand with both of hers and held it for just a moment longer than a formal greeting required. I've been thinking about what to say to you since I got your call, Marion said, and I've decided to stop thinking and just show you. Words are inadequate for this particular situation. That's probably true, Savannah said. Victoria. Marion looked at her carefully. You're steadier than I expected. I've had 14 months of practice. Ethan said you were resilient. He used a different word. Marion almost smiled. He said you were relentless. Said it like it was the thing he admired most about you. Savannah said nothing. She just nodded and looked at the ground for a second, and then looked back up, and that was enough. Marion drove them to the storage facility herself. It was a low-rise building on the edge of town, the kind of place that is aggressively unremarkable by design. Row after row of identical orange doors, numbers stenciled in black, the smell of dust and metal, and the particular stillness of things left waiting. Unit 114. Marion had the facility manager's key. The original key, the one Ethan had mailed, had never arrived. Victoria had intercepted it. They had established that through Ethan's attorney records, which documented the mailing clearly, and which would become, Marion had told them one of several pieces of evidence in the upcoming hearing. The lock opened on the first try. The door rolled up with the mechanical sound of something long closed being opened, and Savannah walked into her brother's world. But the first thing she saw was the motorcycle. It was covered with a drop cloth, but the shape of it was unmistakable, the particular silhouette of a custom bike that had been built with as much attention to art as to engineering. She crossed to it without planning to her feet moving before her mind gave the instruction and pulled the cloth back with both hands. It was the most beautiful machine she had ever seen. The tank was painted in deep midnight blue with silver detailing that caught the light and moved like water. She recognized the technique because she had learned it piece by piece from the letters he had sent her through her teenage years, the careful instructions he had written out longhand with small diagrams in the margins. She had practiced that exact technique on cardboard boxes on scrap wood, on anything flat enough to hold paint. And here it was, the original, the thing she'd been imitating without knowing she was imitating anything. She pressed her palm flat against the tank. Dex stopped a few feet behind her. She heard him breathe in. He finished that about 6 months before he disappeared, Dex said quietly. He wouldn't let anyone see it, said it was personal. A pause. I never knew what the detailing meant. The pattern on the side. Savannah looked at it more closely. The silver pattern wasn't abstract. It was letters, her initials, SC, woven into the design in a way that was only visible if you knew to look for it. Invisible unless you knew. It's mine, she said, not as a claim, as a recognition, as the completion of a sentence that had been started 6 years ago by someone who had known exactly how the story was going to end. Garrett made a sound behind her. She turned and he was standing very still with his hands at his sides and his jaw tight and his eyes doing something complicated that he was working hard to manage. He built it for you, Garrett said, the whole time. We all just thought it was a personal project. He never said. He wouldn't have, she said. He'd have wanted to give it to me himself. The silence that followed was the kind that holds grief and love in equal amounts and doesn't distinguish between them. The paintings were stacked along the left wall, 40, maybe 50 canvases wrapped in brown paper and labeled in Ethan's handwriting. She moved along them slowly, reading the labels, which were not titles but dates, each one marked with a month and a year spanning the last 4 years of his life. She unwrapped 3 of them at random. The first was a landscape, not photographic, deeply emotional, the kind of painting that made you feel a specific time of day rather than see it. The second was a portrait she didn't recognize, a man she'd never seen painted with the kind of intimacy that meant he was someone important. The third made her stop entirely. It was her. She was maybe 15 or 16 in the portrait, sitting at a table with her head bent over a sketchbook, a look of concentration on her face that she recognized from the inside. The particular feeling of being so absorbed in making something that the world falls away entirely. He hadn't painted it from a photograph. He'd painted it from memory. He had been carrying her face in his memory the whole time. She set the painting down carefully. She did not trust her hands with it right now. "The box," Marion said gently. "When you're ready." It was on the shelf at the back. A plain wooden box, not large, about the size of a shoebox, with a simple latch and her name written across the top in Ethan's handwriting. Not her full name, just Savannah. In the same handwriting as the letters, the same handwriting that she had memorized at 13 when she would read his instructions 4 and 5 times, not because she needed to, but because reading them made her feel less alone. She picked it up. It was heavier than it looked. She carried it to the workbench along the back wall and set it down and stood in front of it for a moment. "You can do this with just me if you want," Marion said. "They can wait outside." Savannah glanced at Dex, at Garrett. These were men who had known Ethan for years, who had grieved him in the particular way that men in close communities grieve quietly, continuously in the space between tasks, rather than in dedicated moments of mourning. "Stay," she said. She opened the box. The first thing inside was an envelope with her name on it. Under the envelope was a stack of legal documents held together with a binder clip. Under those was a leather journal. And underneath everything, wrapped in a cloth, she recognized a bandana she had given Ethan when she was 11, red with a white pattern. The only gift she could afford that year was a small bundle of papers folded together. She opened the envelope first. The letter was 8 pages. Both sides of the paper written in the close, careful handwriting he used when he was thinking clearly, not the loose, quick version from his casual notes, the precise version. The version that meant he had written this more than once and chosen every word. She read the first paragraph out loud because she needed to hear it, because she needed it to exist in the air of the room and not just inside her head. "Savannah, if you're reading this, then something happened that I wasn't able to prevent, and you found your way here anyway, which means you are exactly who I always knew you were. I need you to know the following things in this order before you read anything else." She stopped, cleared her throat, continued. "First, I never left you. Whatever you were told, whatever the absence felt like, I was working. Every single day, I was working on getting back to you or building something that would hold you up if I couldn't get back. Second, none of what happened to our family was your fault or your responsibility. You were a child. You have been surviving conditions that adults with full resources struggle with. The fact that you found this means you survived all of it, and I need you to sit with that for a moment before you read further. You survived. That matters." She stopped again. The room was very quiet. Dex had turned away slightly. His shoulders were set in the careful posture of a man managing something that is threatening to become unmanageable. Garrett had his hand over his mouth and was looking at the ceiling with the studied concentration of someone finding something to focus on that isn't the thing directly in front of him. Marion Walsh stood very still with her hands folded and her expression professional and her eyes very bright. Savannah looked back at the letter. "I'm going to read the rest of this later," she said. Her voice came out even, barely. "Tell me about the legal documents." Marion nodded. She was ready for this. She crossed to the workbench and stood beside Savannah and began walking her through it with the careful, clear efficiency of someone who had been preparing this explanation for months. The documents were, as Marion described them, a complete legal architecture. A will revised 3 times over 4 years, each revision more airtight than the last Ethan had clearly had. Marion review it and then revise it again based on her feedback. A trust document establishing Savannah as sole beneficiary of his estate, including the motorcycle, the paintings, a savings account, and his share of a property partnership that Savannah hadn't known existed. A separate legal filing, this one filed with the court 18 months before his disappearance, initiating formal proceedings to establish Savannah as a legally independent adult and contesting Victoria Langford's guardianship on the grounds of financial misconduct. He had been fighting that battle for 18 months before he disappeared. He had filed it in court, he had documentation, he had evidence, and then he had vanished before the case could proceed. Victoria knew about the filing, Marion said. Her attorney was served the notification. She knew. She looked at Savannah directly, which means she had motive, significant motive, to ensure the case never reached a hearing. The word nobody was saying hung in the air between all of them. Savannah looked at the legal documents, at the dates, at the careful, systematic work her brother had done year after year, quietly and alone, to build her a future. "He never told me he filed," she said. He didn't want you to know until it was finished, Marion said. He was afraid of what Victoria would do if you knew and reacted if you confronted her, and she escalated before he was ready. He was protecting me. He was always protecting you. She pressed her hand flat on the documents, felt the weight of the paper, felt the weight of what it represented, years of her brother's time, his money, his attention, all of it pointed in one direction, like a beam of light that had been waiting for something to illuminate. What happens now? She asked. Marion straightened. Her voice shifted back into its professional register. The voice of someone who has been waiting for this question and has a very clear answer. Now we respond to Victoria's emergency hearing petition. We counter with everything in this box. We establish the timeline, his filings, her knowledge of them, the interception of the key, the suspicious timing of her estate moves. She paused. And we establish your independence. 3 weeks of documented employment character witnesses evidence of competency. We walk into that courtroom and we make it absolutely clear that the vulnerable young woman Victoria Langford is describing does not exist. What are our chances? Dex asked. His voice was direct and practical in the way that was most useful right now. With what's in this box strong. Marion didn't qualify it beyond that, but I want you prepared for it to be hard. Victoria has resources and she is not going to concede easily. Her attorney is aggressive. The hearing is going to be uncomfortable. I've been uncomfortable for 14 months, Savannah said. I can manage a courtroom. Marion looked at her with something that might have been the beginning of a smile. I know you can. They were at the storage unit for 2 hours. Savannah took the letter, the journal, and the bundle of folded papers wrapped in the bandana. Marion took custody of the legal documents. Dex photographed everything in the unit on his phone with the systematic thoroughness of someone who understands the value of a record. Garrett carefully rewrapped the paintings and checked the condition of the motorcycle and made a phone call arranging for the unit to have its lock changed that afternoon. They were moving fast because they had to, because Franklin Greer, the private investigator, had shown up at the garage 24 hours ago, which meant Victoria knew approximately where Savannah was, which meant the 3-week clock before the hearing was already ticking and they could not afford to be slow. On the way back to the parking lot, Marion pulled Savannah slightly aside, just far enough that the conversation was between them. There's something I need to tell you that isn't in the documents, she said. Her voice was careful in a way that triggered Savannah's full attention. Tell me. Ethan came to see me about 2 weeks before he disappeared. He was not frightened exactly. Ethan wasn't someone who frightened easily, but he was alert in the way that people are when they know something is watching them. She paused. He told me that someone from Victoria's circle had contacted him, made it clear that the legal filing was known and that continuing to pursue it would create problems. A threat. He described it as a warning, phrased as concern. Marion's expression made clear what she thought of that distinction. He told me to keep copies of everything off-site, multiple locations. He gave me a secondary contact for the documents in case anything happened to him or to me. She met Savannah's eyes. He told me the most important thing is that you got the box, that if you had the box, you had everything you needed. Savannah looked at her. Who contacted him from Victoria's circle? He didn't give me a name. He said he didn't want it on record until he was certain. A pause. But he said it was someone with enough legal authority that they shouldn't have been making that kind of call. She stood with that for a moment, turned it over. An attorney, she said. I believe so, yes. Victoria's estate attorney, the same one who's now filing the emergency petition. Marion said nothing, which was its own answer. Savannah looked across the parking lot at Dex and Garrett, who were standing by the truck, giving her space and looking like what they were. Men prepared to do whatever came next, whatever shape it took. We need to know, Savannah said. If Victoria's attorney made a threat to Ethan 2 weeks before he disappeared, that's not just a state law anymore. No, Marion said quietly. It isn't. Who do we talk to? I have a contact in the DA's office in Buncombe County, someone I trust. Marion's voice was steady. I've been holding off on making that call until I had you, until I had the box. She looked at Savannah directly. I have both now, said. The drive back to Grover's Mill was different from the drive out. The silence was different. It had weight and direction now, rather than just presence. Savannah sat with the box on her lap and the journal against her side and the bundle in her jacket pocket, the bandana rough and familiar against her fingers, and she didn't look at the road. She thought about her brother building a case for her future while someone was building pressure against him. She thought about the key mailed to Victoria's address. She thought about Victoria opening that envelope and understanding exactly what it meant and making a decision. She thought about Ethan's bike in that storage unit, waiting 6 months alone in the dark with her initials woven into the paint like a message only she was supposed to read. Dex, she said. Yeah. What do you think happened to him? The question had been in the room since the first morning. She'd circled around it. Everyone had. But she was asking it directly now because she was done circling. Dex was quiet for a moment. The road moved under them. I think someone made him a problem they needed to disappear, he said. And I think they were careful about it, and they've been careful about it since. And I think the fact that you exist, and you found us, and you have that box in your lap is the thing they were most afraid of. She looked at the box. Then let's make sure they were right to be afraid, she said. Dex didn't respond to that. He just drove. But his hands on the wheel shifted slightly, the small adjustment of someone who has received confirmation of something they were already committed to, and that was enough. Behind them, Garrett's headlights stayed steady in the rearview mirror, constant, unhurried, like people who have decided to see something through. Savannah opened the journal. The first page had no title, just a date 4 years ago, and a single line that Ethan had written at the top of the first entry, the way some people write intentions at the beginning of a new book. She read it twice. Then she closed the journal and pressed it against her chest and stared at the highway ahead with the particular expression of someone who has just had the architecture of their grief completely rearranged. Because what Ethan had written in the careful handwriting she had known since childhood at the top of the first page of a journal he had kept for 4 years and sealed in a box. With her name on it was this: everything I build from this point forward, I build for Savannah. She thinks she's the one who needs saving. She doesn't know yet that she's the one who's going to do it. She read it twice, then a third time. Then she put the journal in her lap beside the box and looked at the road. She didn't say anything else for the rest of the drive. She didn't need to. Marion filed the counter petition on a Friday morning, and by Friday afternoon, Victoria Langford's attorney had already responded with a motion to suppress Ethan's documents on the grounds that their chain of custody was compromised. Savannah was in the garage when Marion called with the news. She had a brush in her hand and 3 commissions lined up on the workbench, and she set the brush down with the careful deliberateness of someone who has learned that small controlled actions keep large, uncontrolled emotions from spilling over. What does that mean for us? She asked. It means they're scared, Marion said. People who are confident in their position don't file suppression motions within 4 hours. They wait. They strategize. They suppress when they have time. A pause. They filed this in 4 hours because someone read our counter petition and panicked. Good, Savannah said. Good is the right word, but I need you to understand something. When scared people panic, they get aggressive. Victoria's attorney, his name is Gerald Marsh, is not a man who loses gracefully. He is going to come at you personally, at your character, your living situation, your associations. Marion's voice was precise and prepared. He is going to stand in that courtroom and describe you in terms designed to make the judge see a troubled young woman who has fallen in with dangerous people. And he is going to do it convincingly because he has done it before. Savannah looked across the garage. Dex was at the back talking to a man she didn't know, gesturing at something mechanical. Rico was at the front with his head under a hood. Holt was sitting on a stool near the window drinking coffee, watching her with the patient attention of someone who has decided to pay attention. Let him try, she said. Marion was quiet for a moment. I need more than confidence, Savannah. I need documentation. I need 3 weeks of evidence that you are employed, productive, contributing, and stable. I need character statements. I need your work on record. She paused. And I need you to talk to someone from the DA's office. My contact, James Whitfield. He wants to meet this week. About Ethan. About the threat made it to Ethan before he disappeared. About the timing. About Gerald Marsh's possible involvement. Another pause, heavier this time. James is careful. He's not going to promise anything. But he's been looking at Marsh's activities for reasons that predate you and predate Ethan. And what I sent him from the documents in that box, he called me within an hour of reading it. Savannah stood very still. Marsh has done this before, she said. It wasn't a question. James believes so. He's building something. Your information could be the piece that makes it cohesive. Marion's voice was steady. But I need you to be prepared for the possibility that this gets bigger than an estate hearing, significantly bigger. Savannah picked up the brush again, looked at the commission in front of her, a new tank job, a man named Caulfield, who wanted a memorial piece for his son. She looked at it the way Ethan had taught her to look at everything that mattered, fully, without flinching. Set up the meeting, she said. Damn. James Whitfield was younger than she expected, mid-40s, lean, with the kind of eyes that were always slightly ahead of the conversation. He met them at Marion's office on Tuesday. Savannah, Marion, Dex. Garrett had wanted to come, and Dex had suggested quietly that a smaller room made for a better first conversation, and Garrett had agreed in the way that meant he would be waiting precisely where they left him when they got back. Whitfield shook Savannah's hand and looked at her with the direct measuring gaze of someone who has spent 20 years deciding who is telling the truth. I've read the documents, he said. Before we start, I want to be clear about what I can and can't offer. I can't promise an investigation timeline. I can't promise outcomes. What I can tell you is that what you brought Marion is significant, and it corroborates things we've been looking at independently. How long have you been looking at Marsh? Dex asked. Whitfield looked at him carefully. Long enough. He turned back to Savannah. What I need from you is a complete timeline. Everything you remember about the period leading up to Ethan's disappearance. Anything he communicated to you directly, letters, calls, anything. He wrote letters, Savannah said. I have them. Whitfield's expression shifted by about 2 degrees, just enough to register. All of them. I kept every letter he ever sent me, from the time I was 12. She met his eyes. Victoria didn't know about the letters. They came to a P.O. box. Ethan set it up for me when I was 13 because he said everyone needed a place that was only theirs. The room was quiet. The last letter he sent, Savannah continued, was dated about 6 weeks before he disappeared. He said something I didn't understand at the time. He said, she stopped, reached into her jacket and pulled out the letter which she had been carrying since the storage unit. She had read it so many times in the past 2 weeks that the paper had gone soft at the folds. She found the paragraph without looking. She read it aloud. Things are moving faster than I planned. Some of that is good. Some of it means I need to be more careful than I have been. I've made arrangements that will protect you regardless of what happens on my end. I want you to know that if there is ever a gap in the communication, if I go quiet for a while, it doesn't mean what it will probably feel like it means. It means I'm moving carefully. Give me time. And if time runs out before I get back to you, look for the people who rode with me. They'll know what to do. She set the letter on the table. Nobody spoke for a moment. He wrote that 6 weeks before he disappeared, Whitfield said. Yes. He knew he was at risk. Yes. Whitfield looked at the letter, then at Marion, then back at Savannah. I need copies of every letter in the sequence. And I need to ask you some questions about Gerald Marsh, specifically whether Ethan ever mentioned that name to you directly. He didn't, Savannah said, not by name, but in the second to last letter, he mentioned an attorney who had reached out on Victoria's behalf. He described him as someone who smiled too much and meant none of it. Dex made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Whitfield wrote something in his notebook. That's a description several other people have used. He said it quietly, mostly to himself. Then to Savannah, I want to be honest with you. The estate hearing and what I'm building are going to run on parallel tracks. I cannot guarantee that my track moves fast enough to affect yours, which means you need to be ready to walk into that courtroom in 10 days and win on the evidence you have. We're ready, Marion said. Whitfield looked at Savannah. She thought about the box, the letter, the journal entry. She thought about her brother spending 4 years building something in the dark and trusting that she would find it. Yes, she said, I'm ready. The 10 days before the hearing were the most concentrated period of work in Savannah's life. She painted every day, not just to build her documented employment record, though Marion needed that, but because the work was the thing that kept her grounded. The garage had become a place of purposeful momentum. Commissions were coming in faster now, word having spread in the quiet, effective way that word spreads in communities where reputation is everything. She worked on 4 pieces simultaneously, managing her time with the focused discipline of someone who understands that every finished piece is both income and evidence. Dex watched her work and said nothing and did things that mattered without announcing them. He made calls, he talked to people, he arranged without telling her he was arranging anything for 6 chapter members to provide written character statements for Marion's file. He had Holt, who turned out to have a very specific kind of persuasiveness in formal settings, contact 2 additional people in the community who had interacted with Savannah and were willing to speak to her character. Rico organized her employment records without being asked dates, hours, commissions, payments, and presented them to Marion in a format that was so clean and thorough that Marion called Dex to ask if Rico had legal training. Mechanic, Dex said, but he pays attention. The night before the hearing, Savannah sat in the garage alone. Everyone else had gone. She had finished the last commission an hour ago, and now she was sitting on a stool near the back, with Ethan's journal open in her lap, reading the entries she hadn't been ready to read in the first days. The middle ones, the ones from 2 years ago where his handwriting had the slightly compressed quality of someone writing under pressure. He had written about the legal filings in the terse, factual way he used for things that frustrated him. He had written about Marion in terms that made it clear he trusted her completely. He had written about the chapter about Dex's stubbornness and Garrett's steadiness, and Rico's surprising emotional intelligence with the deep affection of someone describing a family he had chosen and was grateful for. And then she found the entry dated 4 months before he disappeared. She read it once, then again. Then she sat very still for about 2 minutes. She called Dex. He answered on the second ring, which meant he had been awake, which meant he had known she might call. "I found something," she said, "in the journal." He knew about Marsh specifically. He wrote the name. He wrote that Marsh had approached him directly, not through Victoria directly, and that Marsh had said the estate filing would be withdrawn or things would become complicated for the chapter. She stopped. He was using the chapter as leverage against Ethan. Dex was quiet for a moment that was different from his usual quiet, harder edged. He threatened the chapter, Dex said, to get Ethan to back down from the estate case. She gripped the phone. Ethan didn't back down. He wrote that he documented the conversation and sent the documentation to Marion and told her to hold it. He said, she looked at the journal, read directly. Marsh doesn't understand that threatening the people I love is not a reason to stop. It's the reason to move faster. Silence. Send Marion a photo of that page tonight, Dex said. His voice was very controlled. Right now, before you go to sleep. Already taking the photo. Good. A pause. Savannah. Yeah. He didn't back down because of us. I want you to know that. He wouldn't have stopped for any reason. That's who he was. She looked at the page, at her brother's handwriting, at the evidence of a man refusing to be moved by people who believed leverage was the same thing as power. I know, she said. He taught me that too. The morning of the hearing, Marion called at 7:15 with a piece of information that changed the shape of the day before it had properly started. Gerald Marsh had withdrawn from the case. The call came in at 6:40 that morning. Marion said Marsh's firm notifying her that due to a conflict of interest that had recently come to their attention, Mr. Marsh would no longer be representing Victoria Langford in this matter. A junior attorney from the same firm would appear in his place. Marion had called Whitfield immediately. Whitfield had called back in 12 minutes to tell her that Marsh had voluntarily presented himself to the DA's office at 8 o'clock that morning. Savannah sat with that information for a full 30 seconds. He flipped, she said. I don't have confirmation of that, Marion said carefully. What I have is a man who withdrew from a case he'd been aggressive about for 3 weeks and walked into a DA's office at 8 in the morning without being summoned. She paused. You can draw your own conclusions. He knows the case against him is solid. He's protecting himself. That would be a reasonable inference. Savannah stood up. She was already dressed. She'd been dressed since 6, sitting at Paulette's kitchen table with coffee she wasn't drinking and the journal she'd read through twice in the past week. She was wearing the best clothes she had, which weren't formal by any standard, but which were clean and pressed, and which Paulette had looked at critically the night before, and then disappeared for 20 minutes and returned with a jacket that fit Savannah like it had been made for her. Where did this come from? Savannah had asked. My daughter left it here 4 years ago, and she's not getting it back, Paulette had said. Wear it. You need to look like someone who knows what she's doing. I am someone who knows what she's doing. Then dress like it. She was wearing the jacket. Does this change our approach? She asked Marion. It changes Victoria's position significantly. She's walking in without her primary attorney with a junior replacement who has had approximately 12 hours to prepare. Marion's voice held the precise, contained satisfaction of someone who has been methodical for weeks and is now watching the method pay off. She's going to pivot. She's going to try to make this sympathetic the concerned aunt, the troubled niece, the dangerous environment. She's going to humanize herself. Will it work? Not with what we have. A pause. But it will be uncomfortable. I need you to be prepared for her to look at you across that courtroom and say things that are designed to make you react. She's going to use your parents. She's going to use the grief. She's going to try to make you look unstable. Marion's voice was firm and clear. Do not react, whatever she says. You look at me or you look at the judge. You do not look at her unless you are directed to. Understood. Are Dex and the others there? Savannah looked up. Through Paulette's kitchen window, she could see the street, parked along both sides, a line of motorcycles that had not been there when she went to bed. She counted 8, then 10. Then she stopped counting. They're here, she said. Down. The courthouse in Grover's Mill was a small building that had the particular energy of a place where things were decided, a specific quality of stillness in the quarters, a weight to the air that had nothing to do with the architecture. They arrived at 9:15. Marion and her associate, Savannah. Dex and Garrett, who had agreed to come in without their vests, a concession that Dex had made, without being asked which, said everything about his understanding of what the day required. The rest of the chapter stayed outside. Victoria Langford was already in the corridor when they arrived. Savannah hadn't seen her aunt in 14 months. The last time had been a Tuesday morning in the kitchen of Victoria's house in Charlotte, where Savannah had told her she was leaving, and Victoria had said with the particular coldness of a woman who had spent 60 years winning arguments, "You have nothing. You are nothing without this family's support. You will come back." She had not come back. Victoria was 61, elegant in the way that came from never having had to choose between elegant and necessary, and she was standing with her junior attorney, a pale young man who held his briefcase with the careful tension of someone aware. He had been handed a problem. Not a case, and when Savannah walked in, Victoria's gaze went straight to her. For a moment, the corridor did what corridors do. It held the tension between two people who have a history and a reckoning in equal measure. Then Victoria's expression did something that Savannah did not expect. It softened. Not genuinely, Savannah had spent enough time studying faces to know the difference, but strategically. Victoria shifted into the register of concern and sadness so smoothly it might have convinced someone who didn't know her. "Savannah," she said. Her voice was warm, carefully, precisely warm. "I'm so relieved you're all right." Savannah looked at her for exactly 1 second. Then she looked at Marion and said, "Are we ready?" Marion guided her forward. They walked past Victoria without stopping. Behind her, she heard Victoria say to her attorney, quietly but not quietly enough, "She looks thin. Make sure the judge notices that." Savannah kept walking. Her jaw was tight. She kept walking. The judge was a woman named Honorable Claire Burgess, somewhere in her mid-60s, with reading glasses on a chain, and the kind of face that had heard too many arguments to be impressed by volume and too many lies to be fooled by presentation. She looked at both tables with equal patience and called the hearing to order. Gerald Marsh's replacement, whose name was Kevin Halley, opened with the prepared argument. Savannah was a vulnerable young adult recently turned 18 with no stable housing, no formal employment history, no family support structure beyond a motorcycle club, with a documented history of legal complications. Victoria Langford was a concerned family member seeking to ensure her niece's safety and well-being. He said it professionally and without much conviction, the voice of a man reciting an argument he didn't fully believe. Judge Burgess looked at Marion. "Counselor." Marion stood. She was calm in the way that mountains are calm, not still but settled. She presented the case in the order she had described to Savannah the night before. Employment documentation, 3 weeks of verified income client statements, community character witnesses. Then the legal documents from the storage unit, Ethan's will, the trust, the guardianship filing. When she presented the guardianship filing, the court record, showing that Ethan Carter had initiated legal proceedings to remove Savannah from Victoria Langford's authority 18 months before his disappearance, Halley objected on chain of custody grounds. Judge Burgess looked at the documentation, looked at Marion's authentication records, and said, overruled. Victoria's expression did not change, but her hands folded on the table in front of her, pressed together slightly harder. Marion continued, she presented Ethan's letter to Savannah, the relevant sections, not the personal ones which Savannah had protected fiercely and which Marion had respected without question. She presented documentation of the intercepted key. She presented the journal entry naming Gerald Marsh. At the mention of Marsh's name, Hallie stood up. Your Honor, Mr. Marsh is no longer... I'm aware of the representation change, Counselor, Judge Burgess said. Sit down. He sat. Marion walked the judge through the timeline, Ethan's filing, Victoria's documented awareness of it, the warning delivered by Marsh to Ethan, Ethan's disappearance, Victoria's estate moves beginning 4 months later, the intercepted key, 14 months of a young woman searching alone for information that had been deliberately kept from her. She said it plainly. She let the facts do the work. She didn't perform outrage because she didn't need to. The outrage was already there, embedded in the sequence of events visible to anyone willing to follow the timeline without looking away. When she finished, the courtroom was the specific kind of quiet that follows when something that has been complicated has been made suddenly simple. Judge Burgess looked at Victoria's table. Ms. Langford, your response to the timeline presented. Hallie stood. He made a competent argument. He challenged dates, questioned document authenticity, suggested that the chapter's involvement represented undue influence on a young woman without the life experience to evaluate her situation clearly. Victoria was called to speak on her own behalf. She stood. She was composed. She was the picture of composed, the kind of composed that had been assembled very carefully that morning and required continuous maintenance. Your Honor, Victoria said, I love my niece. Whatever disagreements we have had about how best to support her, my motivation has never been anything other than her well-being. Ethan was troubled. His legal filings were the actions of a young man who did not understand the complexities of estate management. I have done everything in my power. Ms. Langford, Judge Burgess's voice was not raised. It didn't need to be. Did you receive a key mailed to your address, specifically addressed to Savannah Carter, approximately 18 months ago? Victoria's composure held. I receive a great deal of correspondence at that address, and I cannot recall, yes or no, Ms. Langford. A pause that lasted approximately 3 seconds too long. I may have received something of that description. And did you pass that correspondence to your niece, to whom it was specifically addressed? The courtroom was absolutely silent. The mail system is yes or no. Victoria's jaw tightened by a fraction. No. The word landed like something dropped from a significant height. Judge Burgess made a note, looked at Hallie, looked at Marion, then she looked at Savannah. Ms. Carter, she said, I'd like to hear from you directly. Please tell me in your own words what you want from this proceeding. Savannah stood. She had thought about this moment for 10 days. She had thought about what to say and how to say it, and she had written things down and crossed them out and written them again. Marion had offered to help her prepare a statement, and she had declined because she knew that the thing she needed to say was not something that could be prepared. It was something that had been forming in her for 14 months on the road, and it needed to come out the way it had been living, plain and honest and without decoration. She stood in front of Judge Burgess and she spoke. I don't want charity, she said. I don't want pity. I don't want anyone to feel sorry for what I've been through, because feeling sorry doesn't build anything. She paused. What I want is what my brother spent 4 years of his life building for me. Not because I deserve it more than anyone else, because he worked for it, because he believed in me when I was 12 years old, and he never stopped believing in it even when everything around him was telling him to stop. She looked at the judge directly. He is gone, and I don't know yet what happened to him, but I know why he did what he did. He did it because he wanted me to have a chance to become the person he believed I already was. Her voice stayed level, steady. I'm asking this court to recognize that that chance belongs to me. Not because he's gone and I'm the next of kin, because he built it for me and he built it with the law, and I am standing here now asking you to let it stand. The courtroom was still. Judge Burgess looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked at her notes, then at the documents, then at Victoria Langford, who was staring at the table in front of her, with an expression that had finally dropped the performance and revealed something underneath it that was neither sympathy nor dignity. Just the look of someone who has been in a room when the truth has been clearly spoken and has nowhere left to redirect the conversation. "I've heard enough," Judge Burgess said. She denied Victoria's petition in full. She recognized Savannah's legal independence, effective immediately. She ordered a temporary freeze on the estate accounts pending further proceedings, citing documented concerns about the administration of those accounts. And she said, looking directly at Marion, "Counsel, I'd like to see the documentation regarding the timeline of Mr. Carter's disappearance submitted to this court's record. This proceeding may have implications beyond its current scope." "We're aware, Your Honor," Marion said. "We've already been in contact with the appropriate office." Judge Burgess nodded, closed the folder in front of her. "Court is adjourned." The gavel came down. Savannah stood at the table for a moment after everyone else began to move. She stood because her legs needed a second to agree to carry her, not from weakness, from the particular physical response of a body that has been braced against something for a very long time and is trying to process what it means that the pressure has stopped. Marion put her hand on her arm. "You did well." "The documents did well," Savannah said. "The documents wouldn't have meant anything without you walking in there and saying what you said." Marion's voice was firm. "Don't minimize that." Dex was at the back of the room. He hadn't moved from his seat when the gallery began to empty. He was looking at her with an expression that she had learned over 3 weeks to read with some accuracy. It was the expression he wore when something had gone the way it needed to go and he wasn't going to make a production of it. She walked back to where he was sitting. He stood, looked at her. "It held," she said. "It held," he said. Outside, she could hear the sound of engines starting the chapter, who had been waiting. The particular sound of motorcycles that carried something in it she hadn't had a name for when she first walked into that garage 3 weeks ago, but that she had a name for now. It was the sound of people who had shown up. Victoria left through a side door with Hallie. Savannah saw her go. Victoria did not look back. In the brief moment where their paths might have crossed, Victoria had chosen to move differently, the choice of a woman who had lost and knew it and was recalculating. Savannah watched her go without anger, without the complicated grief she might have expected. With something closer to clarity, the specific, clean feeling of having said a true thing in a room where truth was required and having had it heard. Garrett was waiting outside. He looked at her face and read everything he needed to know from it in about 2 seconds. "Good," he said simply. "Yeah," she said. He handed her a cup of coffee that had appeared from somewhere hot, which meant he had planned for both outcomes and was ready either way. She took it. She held it with both hands. Around her, the chapter gathered without ceremony, the way people gather when there is nothing to perform, because the thing that needed to happen has happened. And now there is just the ordinary, irreplaceable fact of being in the same place at the same time. She thought about Ethan's journal, about the entries she had read the night before in the quiet garage, about his handwriting and his certainty and the 4 years he had spent building something in the dark. She thought about the last line of his letter, the one she had been saving, the one she had read once, and then closed the letter because she needed time with it before she could carry it properly. She took it out of her jacket pocket now, unfolded it, read it one more time in the light outside the courthouse. "You are not the person who needs saving. You never were. You are the person who shows up. That has always been enough. That will always be enough. Love, Ethan." She folded it back, put it in her pocket. She drank her coffee. And for the first time in a very long time, the weight she was carrying didn't feel like something pulling her down. It felt like something holding her up. 3 days after the hearing, Marion called with news that Whitfield had moved faster than anyone anticipated. Gerald Marsh had not simply walked into the DA's office to protect himself. He had walked in with documentation, 18 months of it, communications between himself and Victoria Langford, records of payments made through the estate accounts that had no legitimate purpose, and something that nobody had expected, a recorded phone call made by Marsh himself 6 weeks before Ethan disappeared, in which Victoria Langford had said clearly and without ambiguity that she needed the legal filing stopped and that she didn't care how it was done. Savannah was at the workbench when the call came in. She set down the brush. She listened to every word Marion said without interrupting. When Marion finished, she sat on the stool and looked at the painting in front of her for a long time. "She ordered it," Savannah said. "Not a question." The recording doesn't specify what she meant by stopped, Marion said carefully. Marsh claims he interpreted it as the legal filing only, that he made the approach to Ethan, personally delivered the warning, and when Ethan didn't back down, he told Victoria the approach had failed. A pause. He claims he had no knowledge of what happened afterward. Do you believe him? I believe he's telling the version of the truth that protects him most effectively. Whether that version is complete, that's what Whitfield is working to determine. Marion's voice was measured, but underneath it was the particular tension of someone standing at the edge of something large. What I can tell you is that the recording alone is enough to open a formal investigation into Ethan's disappearance. Whitfield filed this morning. Savannah pressed her hand flat on the workbench, felt the solidity of it, felt the particular anchoring quality of a surface that holds still when everything else is moving. They're going to find out what happened to him, she said. They are going to try with considerably more resources than any of us had 3 weeks ago, Marion said. That's real, Savannah. That matters. Yes, she said, it does. She hung up, sat for another minute, then she picked up the brush and went back to work because the painting needed to be finished and because Ethan had taught her that you don't stop the work. When something happens, you carry the something inside the work and let it make the work better. Rico appeared at her shoulder about 10 minutes later. Dex told me, he said. Good. You okay? She considered the question the way she always considered honest questions completely, without rushing to an answer that was easier than the truth. I'm somewhere between okay and not okay, she said. There's a word for that. I just don't know what it is yet. Rico was quiet for a moment. Ethan used to say something when things got complicated. He'd say the truth is a door, not a destination. Getting through it is the beginning, not the end. She turned to look at him. He said that to you by more than once. Rico looked at the painting she was working on. What are you making? She looked at it too. It had started as a commission, a tank for a newer member of the chapter, a young man named Darius, who had lost his younger brother 2 years ago and wanted something that honored him without being mournful. She had been thinking about what that meant for a week. Honor without mourning, presence without grief. She had started with a symbol that Ethan used to draw in the margins of his letters, a small specific thing, a bird mid-flight rendered in 3 quick lines that somehow captured the entire feeling of movement. She had built the composition outward from it the way you build a sentence outward from its most important word. Something that belongs to someone, she said, something that tells them they're not forgotten. Rico looked at it for a long moment. Yeah, he said quietly. That's exactly what it is. The week that followed moved with the layered momentum of a life building itself in real time. Whitfield's investigation became official, and suddenly the shape of the next several months clarified for everyone involved. There would be more meetings, more documentation, more careful navigation of the line between the legal proceedings and the emotional weight of what the legal proceedings were actually about. Marion had told Savannah to expect the process to be slow and to make peace with slow, that justice and speed were rarely traveling in the same direction, and that demanding one would not accelerate the other. Savannah made peace with slow. She did it the way she did everything imperfectly with effort, one day at a time. The garage had become the center of her life in the way that centers happen when you aren't planning for them, not dramatically, not with ceremony, but through the accumulation of ordinary moments that turn a place from somewhere you are into somewhere you belong. She arrived before anyone else and left after most had gone. She knew where the good brushes were and where the coffee maker was temperamental in the morning and which members needed to be approached directly and which ones needed to come to her on their own time. She knew that Holt's wife had been named Patricia and that he had proposed to her in a field behind her parents' house and that the meadow on his tank was that same field. She knew that Garrett's steadiness came from 20 years of deciding over and over that the people around him were worth showing up for. She knew that Rico had a younger sister in Raleigh that he called every Sunday and worried about in the specific, helpless way of a brother who wants to fix things from a distance. She knew all of this because she paid attention. Because Ethan had taught her that the people around you are always telling you who they are if you're willing to listen to the whole sentence, and not just the part that's easy to hear. One morning, about 10 days after the hearing, Dex came in and stood next to her workbench and watched her work for about 3 minutes without speaking, which was not unusual. Then he said, "We want to offer you something formal." She set the brush down, turned to face him. The space at the back of the garage, he said, it's been used for storage for 3 years. We're clearing it. We want to set it up as a proper studio, good light, proper ventilation, the right setup for the kind of work you're doing. He met her eyes. Not as a favor, as a business arrangement. You work out of here, you pay a percentage of commissions as rent, you operate independently. Your work, your clients, your decisions. She looked at him. Why, she asked. Because you're good, he said simply, and because Ethan would have wanted it, and because he stopped. The pause had the quality of someone locating something they don't usually bring out into the open. Because you walked in here with $47 in a portfolio and you asked for a chance to show us something. And that's the kind of thing that deserves a real answer. She was quiet for a moment. I'll pay 30%, she said. We said 25. 30. I don't want discounts. Dex looked at her. The corner of his mouth moved, just barely. 28. Done, she said. She picked up the brush. He walked away. That was the whole conversation, and it was exactly the right length. She found out about the Asheville property on a Thursday morning when Marion called to tell her that the temporary estate freeze had been extended and that the preliminary assessment of Ethan's assets had been completed. The Asheville property had not been sold. Victoria had been drawing rental income from it for 6 years through a management company that existed as far as anyone could determine, primarily to obscure the money trail. The property itself, her maternal grandmother's house, the one her mother had talked about, the one Savannah had assumed was lost, was intact. What condition is it in? Savannah asked. She was sitting in what would become the studio, cross-legged on the floor with her back against the wall because the furniture hadn't arrived yet, and she found the floor clarifying. Good condition, Marion said. The tenants have been responsible. The lease runs through the end of next year. A pause, Ron. After that, it's yours to decide what to do with. Mine. Yours. Unambiguously, legally, completely yours. Marion's voice carried something in it, satisfaction of the specific kind that comes not from winning, but from watching something unjust be corrected. The full estate inventory is going to take another 2 months, but conservatively, between the property, the savings accounts, and the proceeds from the paintings, once they're assessed, Ethan built something significant for you. She leaned her head back against the wall. She thought about a boy in his early 20s leaving Charlotte with a complicated exit and a reputation for being difficult, and finding a garage in a small town and deciding to build a life there. Building it carefully. Building it so well that it created 2 futures instead of one, his and the one he was always making for her in parallel. He didn't know if it would work, she said, more to herself than to Marion. No, Marion agreed. He didn't. He hoped. He prepared. He trusted the law and the people around him and you. She paused. He trusted that you would find your way to the people who could tell you where the box was. He trusted that I'd be stubborn enough. His word was relentless, Marion said. But yes. So, the painting she had been thinking about for 3 weeks took her 4 days to complete. She didn't tell anyone she was working on it. She came in early and stayed late and covered it when she wasn't working on it. Not out of superstition, but out of the instinct to protect something until it was finished, the same instinct that had kept Ethan's plans private, that had kept his preparations between himself and the people who needed to be part of them. When she uncovered it on the 4th day, she was alone in the studio. She stood back and looked at it for a long time. It was painted on a large canvas, the biggest she'd worked on since she had proper space. The composition was built around Ethan's white symbol, the 3-line bird, which she had rendered not as a small marginal note, but as the center of everything large and present in mid-flight, caught in the exact moment between leaving and arriving. Around it, she had built a world, not a literal world, not a landscape, but an emotional one. The colors of every piece she had painted in the garage since she arrived, the visual language of the people she had met, elements that a stranger would see as beautiful abstraction, and that anyone who had been present for the last 3 weeks would recognize as a record. It was the most honest painting she had ever made. She was still looking at it when she heard footsteps. Dex, then Garrett, then Rico and Holt, and 2 others whose boots she recognized by sound, now a thing she hadn't noticed learning until she realized she already knew it. They came in and stopped. Nobody spoke for almost a full minute. Then Garrett said in the voice he used when something had bypassed his usual guardedness and reached him directly, "That's him?" "Yes," she said. How did you? He stopped, started again. The symbol. He used to draw it on everything. Napkins, receipts. He said his sister sent it to him in a letter when she was about 9 and told him it was their secret sign. Savannah turned to look at him. I was 8, she said. I told him every time he saw it, it meant I was thinking about him, so he'd never forget. She looked back at the painting. He never told me he kept using it. Every single piece he ever painted, Rico said. If you knew to look, it was there. She absorbed that. The image of her brother year after year, putting her mark on his work, carrying it through every painting the way he had carried her sketches in his vest pocket. The kind of loyalty that doesn't announce itself because it doesn't need to. It just persists. She turned to face the room. All of them. I wanted to stay here, she said, not sold, not moved. Here in this garage where he worked. She looked at Dex. If that's all right. Dex looked at the painting, looked at her. Yeah, he said, that's where it belongs. So that evening she went out to her car, not because she needed anything from it. She had a room at Paulette's that was hers now, properly hers, with a key and a toothbrush and a specific shelf for her paints. She went to the car because she hadn't been back to it since the night she'd arrived, and something in her needed to close that particular loop to stand at the beginning and know how far the road had gone. The Honda Civic was in the back lot of the garage exactly where she'd parked it the morning she walked in. The packing tape on the rear window was still there. The cracked screen on her phone had been replaced 2 weeks ago, but the car was the same car. The same car she had slept in. The same car she had driven across 3 states running on hope and stubbornness, and a name she hadn't known would open any doors. She stood beside it for a while. Then she heard boots on the gravel behind her. She didn't turn around because she knew the sound. You're not sleeping in it again, Dex said. It was not a question. No, she said. Good. He came to stand beside her. He looked at the car with the same practical attention he gave everything. It needs new tires. I know. And whatever you did to the rear window is a liability. I know. And the muffler sounds like it's held on with a wish. I know, Dex. He was quiet. Then Garrett wants to look at it this weekend. He was a mechanic before everything else. He hasn't lost it. She turned to look at him. Why does everyone here just do things without making a production of it? Because making a production of it takes time, Dex said. And time is the one thing nobody gets back. She looked at the car. I drove 14 months looking for someone who could tell me what happened to my brother. I knocked on every door I could find. I ran out of money 3 times and figured it out. I slept in this car and ate gas station food and kept going because stopping didn't feel like an option. She paused. And then I walked into your garage and said one name and everything shifted. She looked at him. Why didn't I find you sooner? Dex was quiet for a moment. Because you weren't ready to find us sooner, he said. The person who walked into that garage 3 weeks ago wasn't someone who showed up and asked for work. She was someone who showed up and demanded to be seen. That's a different person than the one who would have walked in a year ago. He looked at her steadily. You needed the 14 months. You needed every door that didn't open. You needed to know, really know what you were made of before you had people around you who were worth trusting with it. She thought about that for a long time. That's either very wise or very convenient, she said. Usually both, Dex said. That's how wisdom works. She almost laughed, nearly, close enough to feel the shape of it. The investigation is going to take a long time, she said, finding out what happened to him. We might not, she stopped. We might not get a clear answer. We might not, Dex agreed. He didn't soften it or qualify it, but we're going to have the clearest answer that can be found. And whatever that is, we're going to know that we did everything possible to find it. He paused. That's the thing about Ethan. He built everything he could build. He couldn't control what happened, but everything he could control, he made as solid as he knew how. He looked at her. You come from the same place. That's not nothing. She looked back at the car, at the taped window and the worn paint and the accumulated miles of 14 months of not stopping. I'm going to fix the window, she said. Garrett'll handle the rest. I'm paying for parts. Obviously. She put her hand on the roof of the car, not sentimentally, just the way you touch something that carried you through something hard, with acknowledgement, with gratitude, with the understanding that its job is done and something else can begin. She turned away from it, toward the garage, toward the light coming through the windows and the sound of someone's radio, and the ordinary, irreplaceable sounds of a place where people showed up every day because they chose to. She walked back in. 2 weeks later, on a Saturday morning when the garage was full and 3 commissions were in progress, and Darius had come to see his finished tank and stood in front of it with the expression of someone who has been given back something they thought they'd lost, Savannah stood at her workbench and picked up a brush and began a new piece. She didn't know yet what it would become. She never did at the beginning. Ethan had taught her that too, that you start with the truest thing you know and you let it lead you to the rest. You don't plan the whole painting before you touch the canvas. You pay attention to what the painting needs and you give it that, and you trust that if you're honest enough and patient enough and willing to follow where it leads, it will arrive somewhere true. She started with the 3-line bird. It was always where she started now. She built outward from it, slowly at first, then with increasing certainty the way a story moves when it has finally found its shape. Colors she had been mixing in her mind for weeks came off the brush exactly right. The composition settled naturally into the space. The work moved the way it moved when she was completely present, when the thinking and the doing had fused into a single thing, and there was no distance between intention and execution. She worked through the morning and into the afternoon. People came and went around her. Coffee appeared on the workbench. At some point, she drank it without looking at it. Rico made a comment about lunch that she responded to with a vague affirmative and then went right back into the work. At some point in the late afternoon, she stepped back. The painting was a young woman standing in a garage not described in literal detail, but felt in every color choice, every line, every decision about weight and light. The young woman was surrounded by people who were not looking at her the way you look at someone you're protecting. They were looking at her the way you look at someone who belongs. And in every person's expression, worked into the composition with the care of someone who had been paying attention for weeks, was the same thing. The 3-line bird, her mark, her brother's mark, the secret sign of 2 children who had decided long before the world gave them any reason to trust it that they would be enough for each other. It was in every face in the painting because it was true. It was in every person she had met here. Her brother's belief in her had preceded her arrival. It had lived in these people, in their memory of him, in the way they carried him, and when she walked through the door, it had recognized her. She had not found strangers who had known her brother. She had found people who were already carrying a piece of her without knowing she existed because Ethan had put it there. Holt appeared beside her. He looked at the painting for a long time. "That's us," he said. "Yes, that's really us." His voice was rough at the edges. "How do you do that? Make it feel like something you already knew but didn't have words for." "Ethan said a painting is just a question you already knew the answer to," she said. "You just needed someone to ask it out loud." Holt nodded. He pressed his lips together. He walked away before he showed more of it. Dex came and stood beside her as the day wound down. He looked at the painting the way he looked at everything fully, without rushing to a conclusion. "What are you going to call it?" he asked. She had the answer already, had it before she finished the last stroke. "Home," she said. Dex looked at it one more time. "Yeah," he said, "that's right." She set the brush down, cleaned her hands, stood in the garage where her brother had once stood and looked at the painting she had made of the life she was building in the place she had found by following his name through 14 months of closed doors and wrong turns and gas station sandwiches and taped up windows. And she felt for the first time completely without qualification, without the waiting underscore of threat or uncertainty, the full settled weight of belonging somewhere. Blood may create relatives, but loyalty, the kind that shows up, the kind that prepares, the kind that mails a key with your name on it and trusts that you'll find the lock, loyalty creates family. Savannah Carter had spent 14 months searching for a place to belong. She had walked into a garage with $47 and her brother's name and the stubbornness of someone who had been told too many times that she had nothing, and she had proved to the court, to the chapter, to Victoria Langford, and most importantly to herself, that she had always had everything that mattered. She was 18 years old. She had a studio, a commission list, a legal battle that was finally moving in the right direction, and a painting on the wall with her brother's mark in every face. She had people who showed up. She was not searching anymore. She was home.